The goal for each podcast episode is for us to be honest, open, and transparent. While conversations do include mental health, this show does not replace support from a licensed mental health professional. If you feel triggered by any of these conversations, please feel free to take a break from the episode and check in with your support system.
Let's talk about this more. Let's really look at what the science around this is and what the evidence is around this, right? That this is my nervous system. We can step back, and that's one of the first things I want everybody to do is give some gratitude for your nervous system, for where it's gotten you today. You're here because of it. And so maybe some of the things that are going on in your life aren't working the way you want them to anymore, but that's okay. You can start to work on that. But really having some gratitude and compassion for what's brought you to where you are.
What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health, the podcast. I am your host, Abraham Scully, and you are tuned into the podcast for young adults and leaders in education who are wanting to learn how to create safe spaces for honest dialogue about mental health. There's a lot of talk about mental health. There's a lot of talk about things like suicide and suicide prevention. There's a lot of talk about trauma and what it is and why it's important to be trauma informed and evidence-based. So just like every other podcast episode that I hope you have enjoyed, we've brought on another amazing guest that I'm super excited to introduce to you all. And we're going to have a great conversation, and she's going to share a lot of value. So my tip for you is to grab your notepad, grab your phones to take some notes, and buckle up. We're going to have some fun, and you're going to enjoy this one. So if this is your first time listening to the podcast, thank you so much for listening. Feel free to hit that subscribe button or any of those other podcast buttons so that you never miss another episode. And if you have been listening for a while, thank you so much for sticking with us and supporting the podcast. We're committed to bringing you a ton of value, and we're looking to continue to create content and conversations that enhance your work, that enhance your life, and that allows us to create these honest, open, and transparent conversations. So with that being said, I would like to introduce Kerry Whiteley. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. And I'm glad to be talking about what we're talking about today for many different reasons. So we've had multiple conversations, Kerry, about just the importance of being trauma informed and understanding what trauma is, because one thing that I think we miss the mark on is understanding that, well, I would go as far as to say everyone experiences some level of trauma, and that trauma affects not just our mental state and psychological state, but it manifests within the body as well. So not many people know that. I definitely didn't know that I was affected by trauma when I was younger. So I grew up in a household where my parents were married for over 20 years. And when I was 14 years old, they divorced and our family kind of just broke apart. We went from parents living under one roof, and it was me and my 3 siblings. And then the next day, it's like my dad is living over here, my mom is living over here, my brother and sister is over here, and me and my other sibling is here. And so we're now having to split time and all these other things that was going on at 14 years old. Now, I thought that that was just a normal life experience that you just kind of go through and figure out. But as I became educated and, life continued to go on, I learned that that was actually, traumatic. And that is a form of trauma that I experienced, and it affected me in other areas of my life. So I think just that awareness alone helped and is helping me to navigate some of the kind of like after effects of going through that as a 14-year-old. and what that looks like for me in my personal life and my professional life, how I handle conflict, like all these different things. It's like, it's almost like you don't know what you don't know. And then when you realize something new, it's like this whole world opens up for you.
Yes,
So
get to
it's
know
been,
yourself a little better.
yeah, it's been an adventure and a journey. And I'm excited to have you speak to our audience because of what you bring to the table in terms of in your practice as a counselor and as a speaker and team member of Speaks to Inspire, and all as a mother, as a friend, all those other roles that you play. Your perspective is very unique in your approach. So if you don't mind, so as y'all could probably tell, I like Kerry a lot, which is why I haven't allowed her to introduce herself yet, but I'm going to stop talking and allow you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yes. Hello, listeners. My name is Kerry Whiteley. I am a mental health counselor, therapist here in Gulf Breeze. I'm married, I have 2 kids, and I just am so passionate about this work of truly, again, just getting to know yourself. That's ultimately what therapy and this life journey is about. And I have also embodied that in so many ways, different from your experience, Abraham. Like I struggled with anxiety. And similar to you, I didn't know that's what it was. I didn't know that that's what my physical body was trying to tell me. Yeah, just had no idea it was even a thing when I was younger. It's just, this is just the way life is, I guess. I don't know. I didn't really give it much thought. I was a really shy kid, apprehensive, just not real trusting of people, just kind of kept to myself, and realizing shyness is also temperament and, can be kind of introversion, but it can also be a form of anxiety for kids. Again, didn't know that. Wasn't until college, suffered from insomnia, definitely around exam time. And again, just thought, I don't know, my body's just not sleeping, right? I didn't really think about it being an anxious response, but I would get worried, I'd get short of breath. And again, didn't really give it a second thought, didn't seek out services, any of that. I remember we had that, but I don't remember it being a big thing that was promoted. And then later in life, after a big move, my best friend from college died. I started noticing that I was having what I didn't know they were called then, but now I know were panic attacks, difficulty catching my breath, and it felt very debilitating. I went to therapy for the first time after having my first child, processing some grief, trying to figure out ways to relax, because when my daughter would sleep, I would want her to sleep so I could get some time to myself. But when I had that time, it was almost like paralysis. I didn't really know what to do. I always kind of felt like there was something else I should be doing. And during that time, I learned it was anxiety. So I said, okay, now I have a name for it, but now what? Fast forward, I entered the yoga community. I started doing yoga. I went through yoga teacher training, all these things, learned about my body, went, wow, I can focus on my breath, become aware of my body, and I feel more relaxed. That's pretty powerful information. So fast forward again, 2014, my home was flooded in the whatever they called the 500-year storm, and lost my home. And I'm so thankful I had those tools of body awareness and regulation, because I was able to now see what was happening in my system, what I was telling myself, how that was manifesting in all other areas of my life as well. So I have just taken my own personal journey and built up my own toolbox and gotten to know myself so much more intimately. And through teaching yoga and working with people, just realizing that, kind of guiding other people through that process, of getting to know, what is my body response? What do I tell myself? How am I experiencing life? And various ways that we can learn to navigate being a human, right?
Yeah, that's
That's
awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your own experience. I think that's very empowering, especially coming from a counselor. Sometimes we look at counselors and we're like, oh, they've got it all figured out. They've always had it all figured out. They're the professionals, so they can't understand what I may be going through. So kind of hearing you share, you've experienced your own fair share of like dealing with mental health challenges. And I can only imagine how that enhances how you support your clients, because you're not just coming from theory and education, but you're coming from like personal experience, and you're really trying to understand their specific situation. But as you were talking, it made me think about a conversation I recently had where this young lady was telling me that she just recently learned that through speaking with a mental health professional, she just recently learned that she has PTSD, she has depression, she has anxiety, and another mental illness. And she said when she got the news, like all at once, she was like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy. And it's almost like she got to this place where she's like losing hope. Like there's this, like I'm literally like 30 something right now or 40 something right now. And I'm just finding all this out. Like, what's the point of even trying to work through some of these challenges? So I'm thinking about her and that conversation, and I think that experience is relatable for people that are probably listening. What do you say to that person who almost feels like hopeless
Mm.
and helpless because like they wish they would have known this ahead of time so that they maybe could have like broken it up into chunks and like worked through these different challenges, versus like it's almost like a boatload of stuff, like, and now it's like, what do I do now?
Yeah, my first thought is, wow, that was not helpful for her. Right? I don't think giving our clients a laundry list of diagnosis serves a purpose. And not to mention, PTSD already encompasses anxiety and depression, so we could just call it PTSD and simplify. Secondly, in my opinion, this potentially could be controversial in the mental health community, I don't know, but this is my opinion, along with the mentors that I work with at Beyond Healing Center. It's where I did my somatic integration and processing trainings, is that if the DSM is, we don't call them symptoms, we call them strategies. So the DSM is filled with strategies that all humans
I think I know where you're
use
going.
to navigate life. I would say to that person, you are not those diagnoses. That is not who you are. That's an experience you're having and a strategy you've used to survive your life to where you are. And so much just gratitude and compassion for that body's wisdom to do that. Is it working for you now? Is it causing some problems that don't feel very adaptive anymore? Possibly. And that's where we do the work in therapy to go, well, what would be a better option here? So yeah, I would tell her, you're not your diagnosis. You're very strategic.
So I want to play devil's advocate. Well, I want to play the other side of that, if that's
Sure.
cool.
Yeah.
And one thing that I found in having conversations is that sometimes having the name of that illness or diagnosis
Yes.
opens up the opportunity for that person to have language for what they have been experiencing for so many years. Whereas like in this particular situation, it was almost like debilitating. What do you say when it's like, well, now that I know I have this diagnosis, it explains why all these years I have been experiencing XYZ? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I also 100% agree with that. So it's not an opposing thought or opinion. It's an and. This is a series of strategies. And the reason why we have something like the DSM is to create shared language. When these strategies tend to go together, we call it this. And when these strategies tend to go together, we call it this. And that they tend to, right? So we start looking for patterns of symptoms or strategies, and that's where we go, okay, let's just call it this, and let's just call it this. And sometimes it can be so comforting to go, oh, there's a name for the thing I'm experiencing, and other people experience it too. Wow, that helps me feel more safe and connected. And how can I move through maybe coming up with new strategies to manage that and to connect with other people? Yeah.
Wow, great response. So I just had an idea as you were speaking, but I'm not going to say it
Mhm.
publicly. I'll wait till we stop recording. But if you can
Okay.
remind me to come back to that idea. Matter of
Okay.
fact, I'll make
Write
a
down
note too.
Abraham's idea.
But that's a great point. Thanks for sharing that. And that literally is not what this conversation today is about. So I'm
Okay.
already seeing that we're probably going to need a part two, because you have so much experience and knowledge that I think would be valuable for listeners. So if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, bring her back on the show, just let me know. Send me a DM, Abraham Scully on Instagram, and I'll be sure to ask her permission if we can have her back. So
Sure. Yeah.
all right, so let's dive into today's conversation. So many people have a misunderstanding, or they may have some sort of understanding when it comes to trauma. Like, as you're working with people, and maybe even what you're seeing in the media, what do most people think trauma is? And then share with us, what is trauma?
Yeah, really good question. I think that there's two things that people think trauma is. There's a large group of people that think trauma is only what we kind of say in the mental health community, capital T trauma, like big stuff, war, you know, very physically abusive, or accidents or natural disasters, like really big things. There's a part of the community that, well, not community, there's a large group of people that think of trauma as only that. And I've noticed just through social media that there's another group that thinks trauma is everything. Like, oh my gosh, I was traumatized today, I did this thing, or oh, this, you know, and they might be more like stressors. So there's kind of two sort of opposing, I would say, thoughts on what trauma is. Again, I love, through the work and the training that I do, the broad definition of trauma is anything that is too much too soon, too much for too long, or too little for too long. So
Oh
it's a
my
very,
goodness. Okay, hold up.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, what's the first one? Too much too soon.
Too much for too much too soon.
Give
That's
me an
right.
example of that one, if you
Mm.
can.
Yeah, I don't want to be triggering to anybody listening.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's talk about what you shared, right? You're 14 years old, you know, your parents married, you got this very kind of like stable situation. You didn't describe it that way, but you have some level of a situation with your parents are married, and
They were
then
at least together under one roof. Like, we
we're
had one
together
family
underneath
under
one
one roof.
roof.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what I know, right? And all of a sudden they divorce, everyone's moving around, you're shifting around. That was like a whoa, overwhelm to the system. This was too much too soon. I didn't have the tools to deal with this quite yet.
Okay, what's the next one?
Too much for too long.
Okay, you got an example?
Yeah, I mean, this could look like anything chronic, chronic abuse, chronic emotional abuse, anything that
Mm,
is just an overwhelm to the system that is perpetuates.
And then the last one, an example.
And then too little for too long. You can, an example is like neglect,
Ah,
some level of neglect.
okay. Wow, I've never heard it that way. What else did you have to say? Because I think I cut you off. Sorry.
Well, it really, if we think about it from a nervous system approach, which I do as a somatic therapist, it's anything that overwhelms the system and the nervous system can't seem to get regulated, right? So it's very different from a stressor. A stressor can overwhelm the system, right? Someone cuts us off in traffic and we're like, whoosh, right? We have a big emotional nervous system response. But a traumatic event is something that's considered outside of a normal experience that overwhelms us so that we lose the ability to cope and integrate the experience.
Mm,
And so
wow.
the nervous system holds that as a memory. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's good. Oh man, yeah, we definitely need a part two, because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit, because I shared my personal experience and how I had no idea it was traumatic until I learned about something called ACEs.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I became aware of ACEs and started to do my own, personal deep dive and research on it, I thought to myself, wow, there are a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people who fall under these particular experiences. So can you tell us what ACEs stands for, and then like what is it?
Yeah. I have anybody who's coming in as a new client fill out the ACE assessment. It's an assessment of adverse childhood experiences that are potentially traumatic, and they occur in childhood. It assesses anything, violence, abuse, witnessing abuse, growing up in a family where somebody has a struggle with mental health, growing up in a family where someone in the household struggles with alcohol or drug use. Maybe someone in the family or in the household, doesn't have to necessarily be family, but anyone in the household that's gone to prison. So it assesses if you have had any of those experiences, right? And of course those things can be on a range as well, but the studies show that if you have experienced any of those, there can be an effect in your life, right? In particular, the research shows that when we have an adverse childhood experience, it's been linked to chronic health problems, mental illness, and substance misuse in adulthood. The higher your ACE score, the higher your chance of suffering from psychological or medical problems in adulthood. And in particular, a score of 4 or more increases your risk significantly. So it's linked to chronic depression, to cancer, to coronary heart disease, to diabetes. I mean, this is not just about my psychological struggle, but it's physically and medically affecting the body, can affect the body.
So you and I have had a few conversations, and you shared a book with me called The Body Keeps the Score. And I'm curious to know, what does that even mean on a very practical level? You kind of touched on it just now, but on a very practical level, what does it mean by the body keeps the score? And why is that important to know that trauma affects our body as well?
Yeah, it's truly the most important thing that we can know and investigate, because the body remembers. The body remembers everything, and that is just a biological necessity to keep us alive. And so our nervous system is what remembers. So we start to link up a recognition of when my body, like if my heart rate is up or I'm tense, my body is sensing a threat that it remembers from the past. And it's telling me this now, saying, beware, 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 pay attention, right? And if we can trust that, if we can trust that and not shame ourselves and say, well, nothing is happening. Gosh, I'm so messed up. Or, I don't know what the heck's wrong with me. Maybe I need to go to the doctor and, do something for my heart, right? It's really going, wait a second. Okay, nervous system, what you got? What are you trying to tell me? Right. And so it's really trusting the body's wisdom, because
That's good.
when we're looking at the nervous system, it is involuntary, right? Our autonomic nervous system is involuntary. It senses threat before anything. And then our mind jumps in to try to make sense of it.
That's really good. Thanks for sharing that. So define for me trauma informed mental health services and or practices. What does that even mean to be trauma informed?
Mm-hmm. Can I say one more thing about ACEs?
Please. Yeah.
I want to say that there's a lot of research and studies that also show that having a secure and supportive figure in your life to process that trauma, that you may, say you have a 4 or 5 ACE score. If you had somebody supportive and secure to process and sort of hold you through that, that can mitigate the effect of trauma. We can truly experience almost anything if we have someone to navigate it with us. So I just think that that's really important to pair up with that, so that it's not like, well, gosh, I have an ACE score, then I must be traumatized and not just realize it. Maybe you had somebody with you, right? Arm in arm, like we're in this together. That's a really powerful part of that.
So are you saying that at the time when this individual experienced trauma, there was someone who was with them? Or are you saying long after the trauma was experienced, there is someone that they can identify now? Which one?
Yeah, either or, right? It doesn't have to be that
Okay.
they were experiencing the trauma with them. It might be, but it might be more that after it was experienced, there was kind of a soft place to land. I have someone to go to process through this.
And so, what are some examples of who that safe person or place can even look like that many people may not even be aware of, you know?
Yeah, I mean, let's think of a let's imagine a child who maybe has just chased a ball out into the street and a car's coming and they get really scared and they back up and they're in a state of overwhelmed nervous system. And let's say mom is sitting right there and, oh my gosh, come here, let me hold you, that must have been so scary. It's okay, let me rub your back, right? Heart rate starts to go down, everything's going to be okay, I'm here, and I'm going to keep you safe. And oh, that must have been scary, I'm sorry that happened, right? Something that's just a very simple example.
I like that because it kind of reminds me of, so I was in education for about a year and a half. So you may know of Workman Middle School, right? In
Mm-hmm.
Pensacola. Okay, so our listeners may not, because you may not be in Northwest Florida, but I taught sixth grade there, and boy
Oh,
was it an experience. My
I bet.
goodness.
Mm-hmm.
But what I found when I was a teacher is that being at school for many of my students was a place of safety, especially like inside my classroom. Right. So I physically saw how their disposition shifted when they were walking in the halls versus like when they were inside of my classroom and the door was closed. Like you almost see like the shoulders drop, like, oh, this is a different type of person, right? And
Yes.
that can be
Yeah.
for many different reasons. You know, maybe they experience things outside of school or maybe in their household that can be difficult for them, and then having that place of safety is where they can finally, explore themselves and like have a moment of kind of just like reprieve, like I can just breathe, I can just kind of be present, and not be
Yeah.
thinking about what might happen. So there are educators who listen to the show and maybe they recognize that with some of the students they serve and support. I'm curious to know if you have any strategies, because I really like how you mentioned, the analogy with the mom and the child, where it's like, okay, the mom saw this happen and the mom embraces the child, and immediately the child, their heart rate probably is going down. They feel safe. They feel like, oh, I have someone. So like there are educators who may see themselves as that person that maybe their students have, and it can be on a very basic level, just the person who smiles with them whenever they show up, and just the smile alone, makes a difference for them. But with us talking about trauma and understanding what it means to be trauma informed, for someone in that position who does work with students, what are some maybe tips, strategies that they can utilize, or just information that they can be aware of to be mindful of how they are being that source of support or safety for one of their students?
This podcast is powered by Speaks to Inspire, the mental health solution for young adults suffering in silence. Did you know that students who experience shame and hold negative perceptions about mental health conditions are less likely to reach out for help? By marrying the art of storytelling with mental health education, Speaks to Inspire is creating safe spaces through comprehensive, high-impact programs that help colleges, universities, and schools increase engagement and retention. Learn how you can bring a Speaks to Inspire speaker to your campus by visiting www.speakstoinspire.com/speakers.
Yeah, I think what's really important, Abraham, is that it wasn't just the place. right? That may have definitely played a part in it. It wasn't just the place or just the classroom. It was, you were a big part of that story, right? So being an educator and just being a teacher in a school doesn't ensure that a student's going to walk into your classroom and feel safe. It was something about your presence, right? Your particular presence felt safe to them. Just like the mother with this child in this particular example, is that there was a level of, and I imagine with you, with your students, a level of attunement and a level of co-regulation. That's what the mother was doing to the child, was co-regulating. Now let's imagine a different scenario. Had he come back in with the ball and she starts screaming at him, scolding him, and punishing him for having run out in the street in the first place. Totally different experience. Not co-regulating, very dysregulating, right? So it's the same thing that happens in classrooms quite often. And I no shaming of teachers or educators at all, because that is a very, very hard job. And I think there's a lot of not enough training with what they're working with. It's also underpaid, and we won't even go off on that. But being an attuned to your students in a way that you can co-regulate with them, right? If a child is having a tantrum and people say things like, oh, he just wants attention. And I go, yeah, he wants attention. He wants attention. Is there a way we can give that to him? Right? Can I tune to what this child needs? And I hear some potential statements to that, like, well, I have all these other students to take care of, and I only have this limited time, and I have this curriculum I have to get through. So I would, encourage, I'm not a teacher, so I'm not in that, and I can't begin to understand what that's like, but my curiosity would be, could I create a safe space in my classroom? Rather than a go to the corner, you're punished, could I create a safe space and say, could you just, let's take a deep breath. Why don't you go let's settle, let's go in maybe a quieter, softer lighting place, get yourself regulated. I'm here if you need something, and I'm going to get back to the class, right? Again, from a non-teacher place, something along those lines is what
That's
comes to
really
mind.
good. And it makes me think about some of those classrooms where you'd walk in and you'd see like one of those comfy like couches, or like one of those bean bags or something.
In
So
like a little tent, maybe.
yeah, and they're intentionally trying to create a space or an experience, so that makes a lot of sense. One thing that I did implement when I was in education is I introduced all my students to journaling. And so in the beginning of the year, I bought every, I think it was 60 or 70 or so student a composition notebook. And for a lot of those kids, they had never like journaled in the way that I was introducing them to utilize journaling. It was always like for academic purposes, or I'm writing for an essay. But I was telling them, hey, at the end of every week, we're going to take a moment of silence, and you're going to pull out your notebook and kind of just journal what went on this week. No one is going to read it. The only person that will read it, if you allow me to, is me, and you have to give it to me to read it. If not, then it goes in this cubby that's locked, right? And so I found that just that kind of like adjustment alone started to, you mentioned the word like co-regulation, right? I think during that time, I was also journaling, right? So we're all, in this together kind of experience. So it makes me think like, that's something that not only may have been beneficial for them in that moment, but that's a tool that they can take, long after they leave that grade, because they realize how it helped them process certain feelings or emotions. So that's really cool.
I love that, man. I wish I had you as a teacher. And truthfully, if we can really settle with the idea that all humans, biologically and otherwise, need and seek safety and connection, and that everything we do, DSM, symptoms or strategies, is in service of that. And that it just might show up a little wonky sometimes. But if we can recognize that that's really the strategy, and whatever behavior, whether it's a tantrum or not, was learned, we can start to go, okay, how can I regulate this? And how can I use my energy to help regulate them rather than be dysregulated by that behavior? But ultimately, this person, this child, is seeking safety and connection.
That's so good. And I'm hearing you say that, and it literally takes a shift in perspective, because for you to think that way and approach life in that way, you have to do that intentionally, because otherwise you're going to see the behavior and just label that person as that behavior. Whereas it requires you to kind of think a little bit deeply. So like, I'm thinking also in the perspective of, there are educators, there are individuals who listen to the show, and they either obviously or it's not obvious that they work with or around individuals who have experienced trauma, right? And so they're trying to think about ways to navigate or support these individuals. But then I like what you mentioned earlier about, I want to be mindful of what I say so that it's not triggering for anyone, right? So there's that aspect of it too. But speaking to the care that is necessary, because one thing I have heard from people, who have had multiple experiences, whether it's seeking mental health care or the process of it or what the experience was like from different professionals, what is your take on someone who has experienced trauma and the type of care that they receive? Should someone who is navigating trauma receive trauma-informed care, or it doesn't really matter? Like they can, what's your thought on that?
I think it matters. What is most prevalent, I believe, I think it's shifting. I don't know if that's an accurate statement. I do believe that the mental health world is shifting to a more somatic nervous system approach type of therapy. But conventionally and traditionally, it's what we talk about as a top-down approach, right? Brain to body. And trauma-informed therapy and the work that I do is bottom up, body, nervous system up to the brain, right? Because one of the most evidence-based practices is cognitive behavior therapy, which is primarily and simplistically adapting your thoughts. I have this thought not really working for me. Let's just change it. There you go, right? And of course, not that simple, but that would be the practice. And there's a lot of value in that. I'm not underscoring the value of that at all. However, it's not enough, and it only lasts so long. And I've had that anecdotally from clients. So like, I've done CBT before and it just didn't last. I'm like, well, yeah, it didn't, because the body might not have believed the new idea. The body you might have gone, oh, this negative thought isn't working, let's adapt it to this. And your body's like, not really feeling it. Right. And so it's a bottom up approach of really getting an intimate relationship with your own nervous system. And what is my body doing? Okay, this thing happened in the world, in the environment, in my particular environment. My body's responding, and I'm like, what's going on? Why am I feeling short of breath? Okay, what's the threat? And our mind goes, well, there's not a threat. Okay, but let's put that aside. What did my body perceive as a threat here? And if we can kind of slow that down, and this is all with the work of a therapist who can help guide that, is slow it down. Let me check in with my body. Let me really just tune into the physical sensation and see if the body will reveal a story, right? The story might be, I'm responsible for everything. I have to be perfect. I'm just not good enough for this, right? Whatever that story, that negative belief is, listen to that, right? And then from there we go, well, when did the nervous system start remembering that to prepare you for the future, right? How far does that go? And maybe it's multiple instances, that chronic, right? That too much for too long. Maybe there's a bunch of instances. So we just kind of follow that back, that breadcrumb trail to go, oh, okay, that's where my nervous system first felt that, right?
That's so good. I was so deep into what you're saying, I lost the question.
What is
Yeah.
going to be effective care for trauma? I think was ultimately
Oh,
the
so
question.
there it is. Okay. So I personally know someone who had been trying different therapeutic approaches to overcome a traumatic experience, and they just didn't have any success.
Mm,
And then they found a therapist who did EMDR.
mhm,
And after maybe like 2 months, 2.5 months of working with that therapist and doing EMDR, literally, like, I saw their life transform. Like, I saw the
yeah.
person change, and
Yes.
the person didn't recognize that the changes happened, because I
Mm.
guess maybe because they're just living life. But I saw, like, physiologically, is that a word?
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw their disposition, like the way they
Right.
spoke, the way they perceive certain situations. This person was having like night terrors, and those completely went away. And
Yes.
I was like, was that like a magic trick? Like, what the heck happened?
Kind of.
Because, yeah, right? Because it was like the only thing that really changed in terms of what this person was doing was the fact that they started doing EMDR. And
Mhm.
I was just like, oh my gosh, imagine if more people were exposed to something like this, and how they would realize that life doesn't have to be the way that it's always been for you. Like, you can get freedom, like you can experience like peace, right? And you can actually get to sleep at night,
Yeah.
but then, there's so many other challenges that come up with that when we talk about accessibility, and like, other barriers, maybe even stigma regarding that type of practice. So but like you said, like, treating trauma in that specific way, right, is beneficial, right? It makes
Oh,
sense.
it is profoundly effective. And so, that's kind of that bottom up approach. Now, there's lots of different ways we can treat trauma from a bottom up approach. For me, it is somatic therapy and EMDR. I also use a lot of what we call ego state work, and that would have to probably be on a part two. um, but though all of those kind of mold together to really that informs the trauma work that I do, is somatic, EMDR, and ego state. Yeah, EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's bilateral stimulation while accessing the felt sense in the body, connected to the story that was adapted to connect with that felt sense, and connecting that with past memories. And now we witness from a broader standpoint of just witnessing the experience and reprocessing it, or what I like to say is kind of updating the system, that thing's not happening anymore,
Mm,
and to where your body actually believes it.
yeah. So one thing I like to share is that not all therapists are created equally. So what I mean by that is, just because you had a really bad experience with a therapist in the past, it doesn't mean that that's going to be the experience you have next time. So don't ever give up, and just because this is a therapist and they have the letters behind their name, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are the right person for you. So my approach is always like, treat it like dating, right? Or treat it like you are shopping around for a book
Yes.
that you want on Amazon, or like a new shirt. It's like, you're going
Right.
to look at the reviews, you're going to do your homework, do your research, and then if you get it and you have a bad experience, then you're going to return it, or you're going to try a different route. So the reason I bring that up is because when we talk about professional that someone is working with to work through some of that trauma, may not be as equipped as they possibly can. So it's critically important, like, to do some of that research ahead of time.
Mhm.
Ask, people around you for referrals, and just ensure that with you going through this process as best as you can, you want to do as much as you can to have a good experience, because it really is life-changing.
Absolutely.
I haven't, yeah, go ahead.
I was just agreeing with you. I absolutely encourage people to therapist shop, and, make sure, like you said, do the research. What theories do they follow? What is their their therapeutic technique, and what feels aligning to you? And then also go into that first session, or most therapists, if not all, usually do like a 15-minute phone consultation. You use that as a time to interview the therapist, right? Because ultimately, the therapeutic relationship is a relationship, right? And that's how I view it with clients: is we are in relationship together, and how do we work together, even and all of that. And that has to be, there has to be a felt sense of safe enough for both therapist and client, right? And we have to meet in that safe enough space so that we can start to wade into the depths together. I think it's really important to not only do the research, but also just see how you feel when you're with that person, when you're with the therapist. Yeah.
That's cool. I'm looking at the time, and we're gonna be honest with time. So and I heard you agree to a part 2. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
All right. So couple more questions.
Okay.
When you think about the work that you have been doing, counseling, different people, and the approach that you take in your practice, can you share one maybe like success story, or one without sharing any names or any, specific information, but like something where you realize, wow, this person was positively impacted by our professional relationship or the work that they've put in to heal themselves?
Yeah, and I actually reached out to somebody to get her permission, whether I was going to say any details or not. I wanted just her
Oh, cool.
permission, knowing that I was sharing some of this person's story. This client came in with a very dysregulated nervous system, a lot of medical issues accompanying that. So what was happening in her present life was very dysregulated relationships. She was angry, she was distrustful, she wasn't sleeping, she was having nightmares, she was afraid. And so, we kind of started with that. We were able to connect some of the present things that were happening in her life to past experiences that went all the way back to age 2, abandoned by her mother and left in an orphanage. Okay, through some of the work, a lot of the somatic work, through connecting the physical experience, we were able to go there. So we were able to process those events and kind of broaden her understanding of herself. So one thing I think is really important too, as we kind of dig into this particular case, is that, again, going back to my nervous system has this response. My mind next, step 1, nervous system responds to something environment. Step 2, there's a thought around it or a story that we connect there, okay? When you think about a 2-year-old is reliant upon adults to take care of them, right? They may not consciously think that, but there's a felt sense of, I am reliant upon them. I can't just go leave, get my own place, make dinner and whatever. So it's really important to keep those people around. So if a 2-year-old goes, man, these people are messed up, they're not taking care of me, like I'm just left in this orphanage and they're not checking in with me, like for a child to believe that would be almost detrimental, right? Because that almost instills like, oh, I can't trust them. But deep inside, there's a no, I have to trust them. So what becomes a more adaptive belief is, for this client, I'm alone because I'm not good enough, right? And this is how the system found safety and balance. But as that perpetuated itself through time, right? Now, presently, well, not anymore, but was in a place of dysregulation, a lot of medical issues, marital problems, relationship problems, work problems, all of those things. So as we started to slowly work through this process, and with her bravely willing to go there, we updated her system in a way to remind her that she's not 2 anymore, right? Her system was living in this space of, I can't trust these people and I'm basically on my own here. Something's wrong with me. So we did that. What we landed with through processing and some really deep work was the statement of, that experience had nothing to do with me. I'm good enough and I deserved and had a right to be taken care of.
Wow.
And when her system believed that, I'm looking at what she sent me an email. We had communication toward the termination of her work. I found true freedom from the inside for the first time in my life. And then she shared that again, kind of via text when we were, communicating if it would be okay to share part of her story. And so she is now, for the first time in her life, not in therapy anymore, and feeling free and having great relationships. And it's just such an honor to witness.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm grateful that she was open to having that experience shared, because I think it's going to be very inspiring for especially that person who has tried everything, or they think that they've tried everything and haven't gotten any relief. You haven't tried Kerry yet. Oh, man. So there are some people who they hear the word trauma and they're like, that stuff is not real. Like, that stuff doesn't affect people like us. I've been through difficult stuff in my life and I'm good. I've bounced back. And there's a lot of shame and even stigma around these types of conversations many times. How can we eradicate that stigma?
I feel like if we can normalize the human experience, if we can just normalize that we are all navigating life, threat, stressors, right? We are biological beings out there navigating this. And some stressors may be overwhelming at times and some may not. It really just depends, because our own threat mitigation system is very unique and individual. And so it's really hard to say, well, that shouldn't be stressful to you, or that shouldn't be. It really, we have no idea, because for us to know that, we would have to be that person and have their entire history with us, right? Because so much of what we experience now is just attached to previous experiences. So if we could just normalize that what one person struggles with or doesn't struggle with, and what somebody else does, that it's not necessarily, oh, that person has a mental health disorder and this person, and it's the same thing. And, really just so much judgment and division. If we can just step back and give people space to have their own experience and be potentially that supportive, soft place to land, to process things, but really just start just normalizing and de-shaming our own experience. I feel like that would make a huge difference.
Yeah.
I also think having more open dialogue and sharing stories like the work that Speaks to Inspire is doing, I think that is your mission, and that is what it's doing. Let's talk about this more. Let's really look at what the science around this is and what the evidence is around this. Right? That this is my nervous system. We can step back, and that's one of the first things I want everybody to do, is give some gratitude for your nervous system, for where it's gotten you today. You're here because of it. And so maybe some of the things that are going on in your life aren't working the way you want them to anymore, but that's okay. You can start to work on that. But really having some gratitude and compassion for what's brought you to where you are.
Wow. Not many times we don't even recognize that our nervous system plays a role in anything. We're kind of just living.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's a great thought and a great reminder. It reminds me of this quote a mentor of mine shared once. He said, "Be where your feet are."
Yeah.
And if I am where my feet are, that means I'm right here, right now. and it gives me the awareness to even be in tune with my central nervous system and what's even going on there.
Yeah.
So that's so good. Thank you
Just
for sharing
to
that.
pause and tune in for a moment.
What is mental health to you?
To me, through just kind of thinking back to my journey, is really, again, I've said it a couple of times here, but it's really developing an intimate relationship with yourself, getting to know who you are from the bottom up. What does my body do in life? How does my body respond to that? What are the stories I tell myself? And really, are those true? Are those accurate? Or did I pick that up somewhere along the way? And was that a helpful story at one point? And starting to be curious about that. When we can start to be curious and have some grace and compassion and gratitude, then we can de-shame ourselves and start working toward maybe working with a therapist, processing trauma, or even just starting to see our own possibility and our own potential of what else is there, what's another story, and how can I train my body to start believing that.
Love it. So I'm going to give you a moment to kind of share a little bit about how everyone listening can connect with you and continue the conversation. And maybe they love Kerry as much as I do, and they want to just be her friend.
Yeah, there you go.
So
Always looking for
I,
new friends.
yeah. So I'll give you an opportunity to share. If you are on social media, if you want to give your email, whatever that looks like for them to connect with you. But do you have anything that you'd like the listeners to take away with? Any resources, any thoughts, anything?
I would love to invite anyone listening to start to explore what that, that quote bottom up looks like for them. And that can be through, just very simple practices at home of deep breathing and scanning your body and going, what does my body do? Or pausing when you're out in life and, okay, what's my body doing now? I would also explore the nervous system again from that bottom up approach through various like body work, whether that's something more guided breath work. We have a facilitator here, Justin Nutt, who does a lot of really amazing guided breath work. He does the ice plunge. Other ways of exploring that bottom up approach is through like a sound bath. We have another facilitator, Swan Michelle, who does sound bath, how does sound affect your nervous system through movement, whether it's, swimming or running or tennis or dancing or yoga or, exploring movement in your body. There's just so many ways to explore how our body interprets the world. And so I'd really encourage a lot of exploration that way. And I do that with my clients as well. I offer lots and lots of resources. I like to build an imaginary toolbox for everybody and just throw in lots of different ways to get to know yourself. So that would be my invitation, is to go out there or to go within, to go in there and start to explore.
Cool. And how can we connect with you after this conversation?
So you can find me on Psychology Today. You can find my profile where you can therapist shop there. That's a great place to therapist shop, is on Psychology Today. Read the bio, all the things, they're kind of specialties. There's, email and phone number. So that is the quickest, easiest way. You can find me if you look up Maitri Counseling Center, MAITRI, Maitri. And my email is Kerry Whiteley Therapy @gmail.com. And that's Kerry, KERRY, WHITELEY, therapy @gmail.com.
Awesome. And we will make sure that all of those links are in the show notes. So if you want to work with Kerry, if you want to talk to her, if you got a question or follow up from this episode, feel free to reach out to her. So with that being said, I do want to share some resources for listeners, because I'm finding that a lot of people don't know that there's such thing as a lifeline, as like a suicide crisis lifeline. And many people don't know that the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is now 988. So anyone at any time can text or call 988 and get immediate support from a crisis counselor. It's 24/7, it's confidential, it's free. And if you ever find yourself in a position where you need that support, you can call or text them. And the other thing I like to share is that you don't necessarily have to be in crisis to reach out. Let's say it's 3 a.m. in the morning, your therapist is asleep, or she's created a boundary so that you can't text her at 3 a.m., which is a good thing.
Right.
Or your best friend is asleep and you just need to talk to someone. Reach out to 988 and you can get that support. We also have a ton of resources on our website. So Speaks to Inspire, that's the number 2, inspire.com/resources. You can find the crisis text line there, the suicide and crisis lifeline, and a few other resources, as well as this podcast. And then lastly, I want to share our Facebook group. So if you are still on Facebook, some people have transitioned. They're somewhere else. But if you're still on Facebook, we do have a Facebook group. If you search Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health, you can find our Facebook group there, request to join, and we'd love to have you in there for you to share your thoughts about podcast episodes, any ideas for topic conversations, or anything that's going on in the mental health industry, so that we can continue to ultimately eradicate the stigma that exists. So we'd love to have you in there. And thank you so much for listening to this conversation. I hope it was valuable for you, and we will talk to you next time. Take care.